Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today in this video we are going to learn about Azure monitoring. Let me ask you a question to start our discussion. Let's say you have hosted an application in Azure in production and some of the users of your application complain about the performance of your application. Now you would like to know where exactly in your application you have got the performance related issue. Is it in the infrastructure level? If it is, which infrastructure resource? To get all this information, if you hosted the application in Azure, then you expect the Azure to help you out to find the detail about the issue. And that's where the shared responsibility principle comes into the picture, which comes with Azure. Azure helps you to figure it out, pinpoint of your application infrastructure as well as the application logic. How Azure knows the where exactly in your application infrastructure you have got the issues, or how well or how bad your application infrastructure is performing. Well, to get the information like this, the Azure collects the telemetry data and then it works on those telemetry data and provides the insight for you. If there are any problematic areas for within your application infrastructure, it lets you know through the Azure Health Service or the Security Center that these are the different service areas you have got the pain points. And that's where it is really important in production to consider the right configuration for the Azure monitoring. I hope you understand the point here, why it is important to learn about Azure monitoring. As per the documentation, Azure Monitor helps you to maximize the application availability and the performance of the Azure resources. And it's not only restricted to Azure resources, but it is also collects the telemetry information from the non-Azure resources, such as the resources hosted in the other cloud like AWS or Google, and also from the on-premise resources such as the on-premise virtual machine. It collects those data and help you out. This is the Azure monitoring diagram. Let's try to understand the Azure monitoring structure with the help of this particular diagram, which is given on the Microsoft Docs website. On the left side of this particular diagram, we have the list of resources from which the telemetry data or the monitoring data is being collected by Azure. At the top, you have got the application level. So the application level is basically collecting the telemetry data about your application behavior, how your application act. For example, how a user connects to the login page, connects to the database to fetch the data, what happens if the application exception occurs, and what are the different reasons to get the to receive that particular exception. Basically, getting the inside out information about your application data Azure monitoring is collecting here, and it uses application insight, and the application developer basically uses the Azure application insight service to send those logs to the Azure monitoring service. Next is the operating system logs. So it is the logs of the operating system, both guest and the host operating system. For example, when you create the infrastructure as a service like virtual machines or the containers in Azure, then you may want to get those logs for the guest operating system, I mean the virtual machines operating system, or also the operating system logs for the host operating system where the particular infrastructure resource is being hosted, in this case the Azure data centers, so that based on those logs you would get an idea how the particular resources are performing at the given point of time. Let's take an example of a virtual machine. By having the CPU utilization of the virtual machine at the given point of time, I may get an idea whether a particular virtual machine or the containers are heavily loaded or not. If it is, then I may want to scale up those containers nodes to some more numbers. Next is the Azure Resources. So it's the telemetry data information about the resources. For example, in case of a storage account, I may want to know what are the active number of transactions which is being performed on the storage account at the given point of time. What are the number of connections available on the VPN gateway? Are there any connection drop at the given point of time? Or maybe in case of application gateway, I would like to know what is the performance of the application gateway at the given point of time. Next is the Azure subscription data. So basically you are collecting the data of the Azure subscription itself. So different actions performed on the Azure subscription. For example, what is the Azure policies looks like, what is the costing factor, how is the security of the Azure subscription looks like, what are the different number of quotas available in the Azure subscription, things like that. So that based on this telemetry data, your Azure service will provide the health and the security information about your Azure subscription itself. Next, it goes to the tenant level, which is at the top level. Basically, it collects the information about your Active Directory actions. For example, signing out, signing into the Active Directory tenant by a particular user or the service principal. So things like that, it collects that kind of a telemetry data from the Azure tenant. And then, as I said, now it is also possible to collect the data from the external resources like non-cloud resources or the on-premise resources. That's what the term custom sources being used. And how it collects the data, it uses the different agent. So you need to install or configure the agents such as the log analytics agents or the diagnostic settings agent onto those resources, so that Azure would be able to collect the data from those resources into the monitoring data source. Now, once the data has been sent from these different type of sources, the data is being sent to the monitoring data source or database. So Azure monitoring database is being categorized into two different sections. One is the metrics database and other one is the logs database. The metric database contains the numerical data in a time series database. What do I mean by that? Is it contains the numerical data at a given point of time. For example, what is the percentage of CPU utilization at 2 p.m. for my virtual machine? How many number of transactions being performed on the storage account at the given point of time? So this kind of numerical data is being stored at the given point of time. So this is going to be, as I said, it's a numerical data. It means it is going to be a lightweight and the fast to response database, which is being stored in the metrics section. And when I say it's fast, it can be responded within the 60 seconds of timeline, no matter of the size of data. And that's the reason metrics data can be used to act on some of the critical events which is being performed on your system resources. Now, next type of database we have is the log database. Here in the log database, we have the metrics data as well as some textual information. So it will have the complex object type of data, which will have the numeric data as well as some text data for the individual resources. So each resource in Azure would have their own set of monitoring configuration. Some of them would have, let's say, telemetry data for virtual networks logs. Some of them would have the transaction incoming outgoing requests, things like that. So each and every resource might have the different set of log categories. So those categories basically, or the different type of categories, would have the different objects which needs to be stored, and the data, those object data basically stored into the log database. With the help of log analytics workspace, you can store the data on the database, and then from those log analytics workspace you can write the queries, which is in form of Custo query language, which is a SQL like query language, which you can write on those databases to retrieve the log, and then you can basically perform the insight on this particular log data. Insight will give you the overall basically view of your logs or the data which is being performed on the different resources. With the help of insight, whether it could be the application insight, which will give you the overall view of your application data, and also from the container and the virtual machine visualization, insight visualization, it will give you the overall detail about what are the different monitoring consideration you should be interested in to know more about your system behavior. You can also visualize your data from the visualization factors such as in the dashboard, views, or through the workbook as well. You can convert the insights into the workbook, and then from those workbook you can manage your monitoring data. You can go for the further analysis through the analyze factor. You can perform the analysis from the metrics through the metrics analysis. You can perform the analysis through the custom query language on the log database with the help of log analytics workspace. Once you are happy with the analysis factor, you can also perform the actions on those monitoring data. Actions are like, what do you want to do if there are number of failures been increased on the application gateway connectivity. So you may want to send an alerts to your administrator team that your application gateway is not responding the way it should be expected to respond. In that case, you can set up an alert through your metrics logs or through the workbook. Next, if you wish to export those logs to a third-party application, you can integrate these particular logs to a third-party application with the help of exporting these logs to the event hub, or also you can export the logs to the third-party application with the help of logic apps. We'll look into the details for all these sections when we go to our demonstration. I hope the description given in this diagram makes sense to you. If it doesn't, don't worry, we'll go into the details in the demo. Now let's look at the demonstration. So I'm at the Azure portal in my Active Directory section. So if I scroll it down, you have the monitoring section, and within the monitoring section you have got various sections, such as you have got the default monitoring for signing and sign out, what are the different number of users who has performed this signing operations onto this particular Active Directory. Whenever you go to the monitoring, the very first thing you should be looking at the timeline which has been selected. By default, most of the services selects the last 24 hours of timeline. So if you are interested on a specific timeline, select that particular specific timeline so that you get the appropriate data. So this is the information about the directory. Now if I would like to export these logs or some additional logs basically to the log analytics service, into the logs to perform more detailed level of analysis, then I can do that through the setting up the diagnostic settings right here from this section. I'll check in the details. So similarly detail you'll find it in all the resource. Now if I go back to the Azure subscription, so this is my subscription level. So similar to the application inside, you get the telemetry data about your subscription, such as the activity log which is being performed on that particular subscription. Next, you can go and find the detailed log or monitoring log or your Azure resources. For example, we have got the resources like key vault, virtual machine, IP address, network resources such as the NSGs, and some other type of any other type of resource. So as I said, metrics type of data for the resources in Azure is collected by default. You don't need to do any configuration. I'll show you an example. So if I go to, let's say, key vault. They said this is the key vault which is being configured, and if I go to the metrics, so by default the metrics is available, you don't need to do anything. So this is what the Azure collects the data for their own study, so that they will help you out how your resources are performing. Are there any security threats or attacks going on these particular resources? Somebody is trying to access the let's say in this case somebody is trying to access the key vault secret or reading the key vault secret, things like that. So Azure need to know the health of your services, performance, availability of your services. So that's the reason this metrics is collected by default. But on top of that, if you want to use these metrics data for your own benefit, for example, let's say I would like to know particular secret is not available, or API is not available, overall vault latency, what is the overall latency of the key vault, for example. If this was about the metrics which is available by default, perform the operation metrics operations here. Let's say availability, vault availability, it says 100%. API service availability, this is how it looks like. You can change the graph, different areas, bars, these are the kind of different graphs which it looks like. Let's say if this particular matrix is I want to set an alert, I can click here and set an alert, or I can click here and either I can create a new alert or manage my existing alerts for this key vault resource. We'll go into the details about the alerts in the coming section. Now going back to the diagnostic settings, which is about telemetric settings. As I said, it is going to collect the numerical data for the given point in time. It will store it in the time series database. Now the diagnostic settings, you need to set up the diagnostic setting. It's not by default, it's not collected. And to set up the diagnostic settings, to set up the diagnostic setting, you need to click here, provide the name of your diagnostic settings. Let's say Kiwi logs, for example. Here at the left side you have the category details. So each resource would have their own set of categories. So for example, key vault has two different categories: audit, events, and all metrics. So categories itself is divided in two different types, logs and metrics. So as I said in the discussion, that database contains both log level information, also the metrics level information. So it is going to be combination of both. And if you would like to export the metric data also into the log level, you can do it like this. So you need to choose the category. Obviously it is totally based upon our requirement. So what kind of a log we would like to store it. Once you choose the log, you need to specify the destination at the top. So here in Azure, as of now, we have three different type of destination. One is your log analytics workspace, which is again basically creating the workspace to store the database. Again, it is a Azure service which you need to create in a subscription. So let's say this is the Azure workspace which is already created. So I can export these two types of log into the log analytics workspace. We'll see how do you create a log analytics workspace, what are the different configurations, things like that in detail. But for now, just to understand, the data can be exported either to log analytics workspace, or it can be stored to the storage account. Basically, the purpose of storing the data to the storage account is just for the archival purpose, so that if you would wish to retain the database for the future reference, and once you select the storage account, you see the difference here. It says the retention period. Now one thing about the retention period, one thing to mention about the retention period here, the log data which you are sending it onto these destination detail would have their own set of maximum retention days limitation. For example, storage account and log analytics maximum retention days can be 730 days. Next, you can send the data to the Event Hub. You need to, obviously, Event Hub is the Azure service which you need to configure, and then once you have the Event Hub configured, you can send the log stream to the Event Hub, and then it can be utilized by any of the streaming services, for example. Now, one thing to mention here is each service would have the different log categories. Some of them would have less logs categories, some of them would have more detailed logs to capture. So it's up to your strategy, what type of log you are interested in, and what do we want to do with those type of log. And you need to define your strategy. Keep this in mind, that each and every log which you are storing it into the storage account or the login to workspace, you need to pay the cost for that particular log. Metrics data which is stored by default in Azure, you don't need to pay any cost for that. But the diagnostic logs which you are storing it to the Diagnostics, you need to pay to the cost on per GB basis. And also the data the cost the data which you are storing to the storage account, there will be an increased cost to store the data and to rewrite the data as well. Now, just to check the comparison, open some other resource type. I'll quickly go to this Diagnostic Settings. You can see that the IP address has got these many categories. So if I open here, you'll see those categories are available. Again, if I go to the network interface, this has just got the metrics, it hasn't got any other things to capture. If I go to the virtual network, the virtual network level, you have got these two metrics. So what I mean here is each different resource would have their own set of categories. You need to decide what data you would like to store it. So this was about metrics and logs. Once you configure the log analytics for the key vault, for example, you can go to the logs section. Basically, you can go to the logs and write the queries. So there are, if in each of these services, Azure provides you some predefined set of queries which you can use and run it, and then based on the queries, basically, let's say if I run the query, this is my official key vault query looks like. Let's say in last 7 days, no data performed, no data found, for example. Okay, so whatever is query, let's say if it returns the data, now you can create an alert right from here as well, and create a chart, like we have a chart in the metrics by default. So you can create a chart with the help of queries as well. We'll go into the detail, but this is just to give you an idea. You can write this query, custom queries on your own. Create a alert right here from this section. You can create a dashboard right here from this particular section as well. So we have seen that we can create an alert from dashboard and alerts from the metrics section as well as from the log section as well. So log section represent basically your diagnostic settings which you have configured here. Next, let's go to the insight view. So in Azure is expanding basically the insight view for various resources. Now the list is growing day by day. So insight is basically gives an idea about the different metrics or the categories available for each of the resource. So they will write the graphical representation or insight view for your resource, which you can view it here right here on the resource level. Basically you can visualize the the resource behavior from the insight section, and you can export this particular insight to the workbook right from this particular workbook option. You can customize the insight by modifying the parameters or the queries. You can directly put this particular insight to the dashboard. If you would like to create a workbook, you can create it here, or if you don't want to create, you can create a new workbook, right, and then use that particular workbook option to perform your analysis. This is from accessing, this is about the accessing the monitoring from the individual resources. Now you can also get the similar overview of the monitoring from the monitoring service itself. You can search for the monitoring, you will have this particular icon available. If I go to the monitoring, the similar kind of behavior you will find. This is about the monitoring overview. So what all features which Azure is trying to improve from the monitoring point of view, what are the different new offerings available in terms of the monitoring. Here you get an idea what are the different alerts which are available. You can manage all your alerts for the different resources. So for example, this is till now we were looking at the alerts monitoring metrics for the individual resource, but here you will get an idea about all your alerts for all your resource. So basically this is just an logical collection or the dashboard view of your monitoring for all your subscription and and its resources. Basically here you can again choose the write a matrix for the entire subscription, individual resource and things like that. So based on your selection, basically you would get an space to choose, and then based on the subscription and MS space you will get an metrics criteria which you can select and perform the operation. Again you can write queries for the individual resources right from here, the same as we have seen in the individual resource point. Same goes to the workbook. Here we have the different insight section available. From the inside section you will see that you have the applications which is representing your application inside. You have got the containers, which is your virtual machine container, storage account, SQL server, which is in preview right now, but you can see that you have got the overall detail about the SQL server monitoring, keyboard monitoring, how it looks like, what are the different number of failures look like, and then based on that you can basically act on those failures. What do you want to do? You can go to the direct on the detail of those resources. Okay, this was about the overall view of Azure monitoring. Next, in the next video we are going to look at how do you create the log analytics workspace, set up the Azure Diagnostics, read the logs of your diagnostic settings with the help of Gusto query language. We'll also take a look at how do you configure the alerts, how do you create the workbook and things like that. I hope you enjoyed the video. If it is, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe the channel. Thanks for watching it.